Thank you, Will. So we have a chance to ask a
Okay.
question or two, and then I'll adjourn for a minute and open it up to you guys as well afterwards. So, Maria, would you like to start with a question for Will?
Oh, sure. Thank you. There were so many bravura moments in your presentation. I hardly know where to begin. But maybe I will play devil's advocate in a way and just ask you about materialism. You said at the end materialism has less of a hold. And I hope that's true. As I think of the afterlife of the motifs, symbols, and myths that you explore, I wondered whether you could say something about how they've migrated into our technological devices. That is, we have laptops that are made by Apple. And I know there's a connection with Turing and all of that, but we have Kindle Fire. And I wonder here whether you could say something about how knowledge may be migrating into machines and devices. So if someone were going to write a sequel to your dissertation 50 years from now, what do you think they might have to, or can you project some of this into the future? Or maybe what I've said is wrong-headed.
No, I definitely have a thought that I'd like to put into this one. Yeah, it's a valuable question. I can do. Okay, so basically, first I want to comment on the concern that maybe materialism in some ways isn't disappearing, and maybe suggest that the psyche is so compensatory, right? So when materialism fades in one way, perhaps it becomes stronger in another, and the same with the ego and many things. So, but then to comment on the way that I think that materialism, to comment on our technologies, and I think what you're asking for. During this presentation, at least once, I used my iPhone to change my Apple phone to change the slide, right? Which means that I didn't touch anything that was physically connected with what we were looking at to make it change. There was no mechanical or material interaction required. It was only a virtual interface. And so more and more we exist in virtual interfaces, which means that our commitment to materiality as the ground of being is being rapidly undermined by the, not so much undermined, it's more so just that it's not even philosophical. It's more so behavioral conditioning, just experience, that we have so many more experiences with reality that are not material. It used to be we had to physically open doors. Now we don't touch them; they open.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we don't type. We can just dictate with the voice.
Exactly, and in fact, I think going way back in technology, music is one of the original demonstrators of what Einstein and Newton both called spooky action at a distance. And what we now know, of course, is that gravity, which drove Newton crazy. He was like, "How the heck does gravity up there? And how does the sun influence us here? They're not touching." And the Newtonian paradigm is all about mechanical touching. And of course, now we understand that it's ripples in space-time and that it's waves, it's field. That just like Pythagoras said, there is a harmony of the spheres, and all the planets are in a relationship with each other, defined by their frequencies and waves, whether they're gravitational or electromagnetic. So I think our so there's the virtuality of our technologies, and then there's also, this is a big one, every technology that's important to us, like my iPhone or my Apple phone. And by the way, just to get materialistic on the other side, Apple has more capital, more money in the bank than any other company in the world. Just money, just cash, which is kind of interesting for the Apple to me, materialistically. But the Apple phone has zero material value. It's barely a paperweight, But it's probably the most valuable tool I got right now, It's the Ninja tool. And it exists because, and it works by floating on a sea of waves, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's cell phone, whether it's satellite. Every communication, whether it's down a wire or from a phone, wirelessly, all the communications are through waves. So you got Hermes the messenger with the caduceal staff, which is that wave staff, and I'm convinced that waves are always the connector. They're always the messenger. Our eyes, we see because light waves come into our eyes. We hear because sound waves come into our ear. And if we get really sophisticated, our other senses are hugely influenced and dependent on frequencies as well. But it's much more obvious with sight sound. So I think I've answered your question mostly, well, actually, let me just real quick jump 50 years in the future and think about how crazy some technologies can get. Let's imagine, and I've got friends, Devin here too has some friends that are working on virtual reality stuff. You've got the Magic Leap, incredible. You projects images into your eye that you can see things here that aren't even here, but it makes it look like it's here, and you can touch them. And basically, they're whole layers. You can add layers of reality that are not based on materiality at all. And I think in 50 years, those layers of reality are going to be just about as influential and as present and important to us as the physical world. Look at how important email is to us compared to the physical world. I anticipate that will happen more and more, and that we will condition children and adults more and more to be less and less committed to reductive materialism.
Great. Thank you. That was terrific.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Maria. Kieran, would you like to?
Yeah. I noticed 6 questions. I'm going to prioritize them.
Okay. Here comes a hard one. I can feel it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, one of them, first of all, let me say what an intellectual feat it is to survey that amount of knowledge and to pull out the underlying pattern there across such a vast span of history and different traditions. Really incredible.
Thank you.
And it's probably even more of a feat to present on that in 30 minutes. So my background is young. I'm interested in deep structures, I guess, and this question won't be wholly new to you because I put it in my written comments. I'm curious as to what is the underlying structure here. You call it a meta-narrative, okay? Mm-hmm. So if it's a meta-narrative, what is the underlying form mechanism? That's the first part.
Okay.
And I think I'm thinking particularly, is it something that's metaphysical, ontological? Mm-hmm. Is there some deep structure in the nature of things, or is it, as you sometimes appear to imply, part of a narrative and therefore epistemological, psychological? So that would be the first thing, if you just hold that.
Okay, sure.
And then the second part is, if that's the formal cause part, in Aristotelian terms, I'm also interested in the final cause part. Why? Okay, so why, and again, you mentioned this in that final slide, but I wonder specifically if there's a purpose of the fall into alienation, estrangement, matter, egoic individualism, and that fall is not wholly negative, because the union that you rightly exalt kind of depends on the individualism that it precedes that. So, how do you respond to the how and the what?
Okay, great. Those are great questions. You pushed me to the limit of where I limited my dissertation, where I realized I need to, I could try and talk about the archetypal pattern. That's what I think is, I do, truth be told, think it's more universal than I focused in the dissertation. The dissertation, I felt like I needed to narrow it to, I found that narrowing it to these 3 Western traditions was enabled me to package it nicely and tight, but I think that the pattern can be found, for example, the Buddha kind of first loses his innocence sitting under a rose apple tree, and then he achieves enlightenment sitting beneath a fig tree. And just to give you an image, the rose apple is a stone fruit, and the fig is, one, it's a flower, and 2, it's empty in the center. And so I think that, this is just a Buddhist narrative, where I think it's the same meta-narrative, where you have this sense of isolation, and of course you see the Atman in this image, right? Or the ego and the monad. And Tarnas likes to draw that circled point too. So I think you go from this isolation, it's like almost an egg, a cosmic egg, but then when you go from this idea of an intrinsically valuable thing, well, for the Buddha, it's to go to Paticca Samuppada. Everything is what it is with everything else, this dependent co-arising. So I think that it's more universal, but I focused on it in this dissertation just to the Western thing. And I tried to go here because I think it's convincing that it's a Western narrative, and I think that that's a pretty big deal on its own, just to like realize that, because whenever you try and talk about something universal or objective, there are all kinds of pushbacks. And so I want this thing to set and land on people just as like us. This is our, Western meta-narrative. It's there, whether it's objective or not. That's a secondary question. But crucial secondary question, or at least in maybe not, maybe it's actually primary. So I think that, and to come back to that in a second, but to jump into your second question, the value of this, I could flip this over, and do it that way, but this book's a disaster. So basically, I think it's like the caduceal staff, the ups and downs are actually part of the moving forward. So I completely believe that part of the value of recognizing a meta-narrative is to recognize that what's seen as bad is not bad. What's seen as bad is actually, the fall is actually the beginning of a meta-narrative. It's like saying at the beginning of a movie where something bad happens is a disaster, when at the end it's like, that's what the movie's all about. So I think that it's not bad, it's not a bad fall. And another thing I know that you'd probably like to hear me comment on is that the entry into egoism and into the self, the self identity, which is crucial in both of these stories and the development of knowledge. This is a complication that I really was having a hard time dealing with in the dissertation, which is that I don't see materialism as a problem. I don't see atomism as egoism as a problem. I see when you take one side of a two-sided metaphor and make that one side everything. So you got egoism and altruism, to say it simply, or something like that. If you just stick on egoism, it's a problem. If you leave out the self and go to altruism, it's a problem. To me, meta-narratives and looking at process, I love Hegel's philosophy. When you look at a process, you can normally take away the problem and see the problem as simply part of a process and see it as playing a big part in a major whole. And ultimately, I believe in the photon. I believe in the Grailstone, which is a synthesis of particle and wave, of self and the altruistic self. To me, they're both crucial. They both must be combined. And as soon as the pendulum swings to either side too far, you've missed it. So I love that moment in the Egyptian Amduat when the lunar and solar eye are balanced. They have the same size.
Can I jump in just with a little bit more on the why? Because I'm wondering whether there's an evolution here, or whether it's just a recurring pattern that actually doesn't really lead anywhere. So,
I think that this is the... my answer to that is not very academic, in a sense, because it's beyond where I push this academically. This is, on a personal level, ultimately what I believe, not something I can necessarily defend, is that this is also the ascetics path. This is the mystical path. This is the path to go from the isolated self to the universal self. I believe this is the path to enlightenment, in a sense, in an abstract way. This to me is actually what I would say. I tried to pull out the Buddhist path as a common meta-narrative with this. So to me, it's a recurring pattern, but it's really importantly the pattern of the liberation from isolation of the individual, which is infinitely and always important to spiritual and soulful humans, and I think humans are inevitably and always soulful, so this is crucial to our souls to see that we're not isolated, otherwise we'll be in serious anxiety.
I think it's a wise move. You present the data, offer an interpretation, but then leave the conclusion open. And I think within the limits of dissertation, that's, my bias is to look for deep structures.
And that was really great to work with you on them.
Glad that you shared something of your own perspective, even if it's beyond the limits of it.
It's really that's been a challenge, a big challenge, but a really good challenge for me. That was, to say it real simply, Walter Odeinik sat me down and was like, you need to anchor your work a little more, and it was like a serious conversation, and I've been channeling some Walter in this one, that's for sure.
Well, you can't do better than that.